Hi, I'm Kathy Thornhill, founder of Chat and Chew, and you're joining us at Chat and Chew Live, online. What's Chat and Chew? Well, it's a health study group of people who've come together because they're interested in taking care of their own health through some dietary changes. And we do that in a variety of ways. We provide information, we have demonstrations, we have speakers, both live and through Skypes. We also have meals together, we do tours together, we have friendship together to help each other as we meet our own personal goals. All of our meetings are based on the research and clinicians who have worked hard to determine what's the connection between diet and disease, the chronic diseases that Americans often get. And so one of those experts, Dr. John McDougall, he speaks to us about the importance of beginning the right way, and that is that if you are filling your plates with lots and lots of plants and lots of starches, you'll want to add a B12 supplement to your diet. Also, he suggests that if you're sick, if you're on medication, you check with your medical provider first, because diet is powerful medicine. And that's something you might want to do, is be sure they're in the loop and they know what you're doing. It doesn't hurt to check with your medical provider even when you change your exercise habits. So that's a good thing to do anyway. Now, you'll be watching Chat on Chew in live, and you might wonder, what am I going to do with this information? Well, I might meet my own personal goals, but it might be fun to pull in a couple of friends, like some of our people who watch these meetings through Livestream. And you could even do what one in California, Jolynn, did. She invited a couple friends and they each brought something to eat, something healthy, as they chat and chew. Or you might want to start your own health study group. You name it what you want. So let's get started. Our meeting topic today is the link between diet and cancer. Our speaker of the October 13th, 2016 meeting is Dr. T.Colin Campbell. He's an expert in the field of research on cancer and diet. He is Professor Emeritus of Nutritional Biochemistry, Cornell University, and author of a variety of best-selling books, including one I bet you know of, The China Study. He just returned from Europe, where he was asked to come speak to numerous countries and the European Parliament, the European Union Parliament. So we were thrilled to have him as our Skype speaker for our October meeting, as I'm sure you will be here for the Chat and Chew online. Now, what we did when we had him for the actual meeting was we all watched Forks Over Knives Extended interview of Dr. Campbell to get a good understanding of the research he's done for diet and cancer. You might want to do that too. Below, you'll see the link to that Forks Over Knives Extended video. You could watch it now and then come back here to this website so that you can listen to the questions and answers by Dr. Campbell. He'll be answering questions from people in Polk County as well as across the United States. So, let's get started.
Dr. Campbell, how is the GMOs affecting the plant seeds at this time? Have you studied that?
Well, I haven't personally studied that, but I've certainly been very familiar with, that whole story about the development of GMOs. We actually got involved in crossbreeding plants 30, 40, 50 years ago. In the more recent times, it's been through genetic engineering. And it's true, we can make bigger strawberries, and we can make, better tasting this and that, and so forth and so on. But we can, what the problem with GMOs is that whatever we do for a certain purpose, also at the same time, there's unintended consequences, what we say, in the future. We don't know what they are. That's not possible to study that. And so my point of view on that is we shouldn't do it, be honest about it, because there may be some unintended consequences in the future, and almost for certain there will be. But by the time we know those consequences, it'll be too late. So I think the GMO experiment is not a good one. That's just my view.
How do we get the proper seeds to plant to get the good plant-based diet?
That's a really important question, and one can get in many parts of the world. I think here in the United States, you can get some of the old heirloom kind of seeds or the original seeds, non-GMO. You can get that. The issue here, though, I think you're referring to is the fact that Monsanto, in particular, has been devising systems by which farmers have to buy their seeds. And so those plants then grow if they have some seeds or whatever. The farmer cannot get out of the grip of the industry. And so I know there's some places you can't buy seeds or you can't grow the non-GMO seeds. I didn't know that was happening here very much in the United States. I know it's happening elsewhere, but that's a serious, I think it's almost a criminal behavior.
We are boycotting Monsanto.
Yes,
and other
good.
companies like that because, and I've been doing that from North Carolina in different groups that I've been in. So I just was curious on how much you know about it. So thank you very much for your help.
All right.
Thank you. And this is Betty. Betty has a question for you.
Thanks for helping us. I have actually two quick questions. One of them, when you started your protein study, the protein that you used was animal protein, is that correct?
Right.
Okay, is there a difference today because of what the animals are eating in the protein that you were using? Is there a difference in the protein, or protein is protein?
Protein, well, animal protein is animal protein. It's just the protein we're using today or we have is exactly the same as it was 50 to 100 years ago. I should say, though, however, in the research that I did with my students, at that time, this was the protein it was a casein from milk. And it was taken from cows before the hormones were introduced. So in other words, we were using protein more or less from grass-fed animals. It really had nothing to do with, what we worry about today to some extent. So it's the protein itself is the problem. And it's just the animal protein, not the plant protein.
The second question I have is, I've read, I have cancer, and I've read about sugar kind of feeding the cancer along. And does that have anything to do with, is that true?
Well, that's an old story that started to some extent in the 1930s with a fairly famous scientist from Germany at the time. And I think that story has been distorted in the modern day. The key thing for people with disease, diagnosed with some disease, especially like cancer and heart disease and so forth, the key thing they should do is to go on a whole food, plant-based diet. That's really what it's all about. And by the way, on that kind of diet, however you want to mix it and match it, it's legumes and vegetables and fruits and whole grains and so forth. That kind of diet has all the protein we need. In fact, it has the ideal level of protein. And so to sort of suggest that we should need more protein, let's say from animal foods, which most people thought was the only source of protein, it's not. We get all the protein we need from plant-based foods. And we do not need any extra protein. None.
The powdered protein is
No.
no.
I think it was, I started out my career 60 years ago, actually, in the laboratory. And at that time, I had come from the dairy farm. And I did my doctoral dissertation basically on a research project that was advancing greater consumption of protein. That's where I came from. More protein is better, if you will. And when I got involved in my work, which included not only my research, but also going to the Philippines and coordinating a nationwide program at feeding malnourished children, I must tell you, the research that came out, as many of you may know, showed exactly the opposite of what I thought. And I didn't really believe it in the beginning, but it was so marked, it was so substantial, it was amazing. So that's really where my research started, and then we did many, many years of research, first to see if that's really true, and then how it works. So as I say, I'm coming from the opposite point of view of what I now hold, because of the research.
Thank you very much.
Okay, and we've got one more question from the audience from Laura, and then we'll have some questions that we got emails.
Hi, Dr. Campbell. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
My name's Laura, and I am a dietitian who teaches dietetics students. And students can be quite passionate, as I'm sure you know. And they come to me either believing everything you say about being vegan, or they come from the paleo end of things. So my question is to you is, what research can I point to them to show that we have eliminated the confounding variable of processing? Their point is that, you know, we can eat meat if it definitely comes from the animal to my plate and there's no processing in between. How can I tell them that's not true?
Well, say that I said so. No, actually, I should tell you the paleo diet, which I'm quite familiar with. In fact, I've debated the so-called father of that movement.
Yes.
And that's just one version of the so-called low-carb diet. The low-carb diet started by Dr. Atkins, continued by the South Beach diet, Zone diet, all of those. The paleo diet is nothing more than the same. And what that means is decreasing carbohydrate as much as possible. I'm sure you know from your dietetic background. And decrease as much as possible. There's part of that story is true. You know, oftentimes the biggest, I have to say it, the biggest lies are also contain a kernel of truth, which makes them more dangerous. So if they were to say to reduce refined carbohydrates like sugar and white flour, for example, we all agree. But they say it in very general, and the only kind of foods that have carbohydrate really in them are plants. So this was an attempt to actually divert attention away from the kind of diet I'm talking about. And just on that point, by the way, I don't use the word vegan because the vegan diet is not the best. I use a whole food plant-based diet. We can talk about that. But in any case, this whole food plant-based diet, actually, you put people on it, in a matter of a week or two, you see dramatic changes. The paleo diet cannot begin to produce those same results.
The clinical evidence in the changes that individuals have seen.
Yes, that's one thing. The other thing, too, is, you know, I didn't discuss it quite as well as I should in the China study. We have a new version of the China study coming out after the first of the year. But basically, there's two kinds of evidence, at least, that I relied on. Number one, we worked very hard on understanding the mechanism by which protein increases cancer and heart disease and so forth. That's one kind of issue. It was irrefutable. I mean, irrefutable if you pronounce it that way. And the other kind of evidence is the long-term effect. If you compare populations who spent their lifetimes using whatever diet they happen to be using, you can see almost a perfect relationship. The higher the animal protein consumption in different countries, the higher is the risk for cancer, heart disease, and different kinds of cancer. It's very clear. And the paleo diet cannot do that.
My class will be watching Forks Over Knives next month, so I'm excited to tell them I actually spoke to you. Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you, Laura, for that question. We're glad you could join us today.
We do have one more person that has a question for you, and this is Robert.
I'm related to the person that you're seated next to. By marriage. Dr. Campbell, I got an observation, then a question. I've read your book whole, I've read the China study, and the China study is what put me on my path. For 5 years now, I've eaten whole food, plant-based. And as an athlete who works, for instance, I got up at 4:30 this morning, worked out 2 hours before work. So working out is important to me. And as a whole food, plant-based eater, I could give a darn about protein, carbohydrates, and fat. I don't care. I eat a whole food, plant-based diet. I eat a heck of a lot of food, and I'm healthy and a good athlete for my age 68. So here's my question. How can everybody out here get to the point where protein, fat, and carbohydrates are just not that important? If you're eating healthy, you don't have to worry about it. If you eat more food, for instance, you get more protein. So how can we quit talking about macronutrients and start talking about what's important, a whole food, plant-based diet?
Yeah, I love your comment, by the way. You said it really well. However, I did want to make one slight adjustment, namely in research. I should say that the way we learn about what food does is basically understanding what the nutrients do. That's research. That's the way it is. And but then for the general public who are just wanting to eat food and deciding what they want to do, they don't need to know all those details. That's absolutely true. I couldn't agree with you more. And in fact, that's what I wrote in my book Whole. If you have read that book, sort of pointing out that we get too fixated on numbers and identities of the different kinds of nutrients and so forth and so on. It's important for scientists and researchers to understand how it works. But for the general public, we don't need to, be that concerned about it. Just eat the food. Just eat the right food. That's all.
Cool.
We did have one more question from the audience that I'm going to ask for her. And her question is about organics and pesticides, and how concerned do we need to be if we do buy foods that are not organic and may contain pesticides, may contain chemicals, herbicides, whatever. Is that a big concern, or how much should we be worried about it?
It's certainly not a big concern. That is to say, if you go to the grocery store, my wife and I, we tend to buy organic foods when possible. And that's pretty often, more expensive. But in science, we do not have evidence that all those pesticides and that nasty stuff, we do not have evidence that creates much of a problem. I would have thought otherwise. But the main thing to do when you go to the grocery store, go to the produce section and buy it. Go for the organic if you like, but don't avoid the other. Because the big effect is coming from the food itself, not from the pesticides.
Thank you. Nat is going to ask some questions that we had emailed to us from some of our other groups.
Hi, Dr. Campbell. Thank you for being here, of course. One of our questions has to do with oils. As you know, there are a variety of different feelings on that. What is your research? How can you explain your thoughts on oils?
Let me divide the oils or fats into two different categories. First off, we have oils and fats in the whole food. From my point of view, that's all. We don't need to worry about that. We can eat nuts, we can eat avocado, we can have coconut and that sort of thing. I mean, we need some oil and some fat, and that can be provided by the plants, if you will. When we're consuming that form here, it's not an issue. Here's where the issue arises. The issue arises with the added oils. We use oils to fry things, and we use oils and so forth and on our salads and that kind of thing. The added oils mainly are, in the United States at least, mainly are the so-called omega-6 oils, which are pro-inflammatory. Omega-3 oils, which is their counterpart, are anti-inflammatory. And being pro-inflammatory tends to increase heart disease, cancer, and things like that. So the ratio of the omega-6 pro-inflammatory to the omega-3 ought to be around 2 to 1, 3 to 1, maybe 1 to 1. That's what plants have. Unfortunately, in our society, we use so much added oil, it's not 2 to 1 or 3 to 1, it's more like 15 to 1 or 20 to 1, even 30 to 1. That's a problem because we're consuming a diet now really overloaded with pro-inflammatory effects, which can increase disease risk. So that's one of the major reasons to cut down on the use of added oils. But if you want some nuts and you want some other the high fat things on occasion, that's fine. That's the issue. Is to make clear that there's a difference between added oils on one hand or fats like butter and lard, because they add a lot of energy. When we add all those calories, we don't get the nutrients, of course. So we just really try to use a diet, whole food, plant-based, not oils and fats added to it.
Before you go on that, let me just ask one more question myself, because I had a question. If you are watching your weight and you want to be sure that you don't add the extra calories that you might have with oils, because right. Polk County is 7th in the nation for obesity. So where this audience is, we have the 7th most obese population. Can we still get the oils we need in our diet from all the other plant foods?
Oh yes, the amount of oil and fat that we need as a percent of calories is not more than 4 to 5%.
Okay.
So the plants have plenty. That's not an issue. We need very little. It's important, we get that, but we can get that from consuming the plants. And incidentally, I should make a comment. Obesity is the one disease, if you will, or one condition that attracts the most attention, and so the marketing people say. And understandably so, you know, we're overweight and so forth and so on, especially for children's problem. But we should not just focus on obesity by itself, because obesity is only a symptom of things to come, like heart disease, diabetes, of course, and that kind of thing. So we should think of it as the whole system. Obesity is kind of the canary in the coal mine for the young person.
So it's like a fever.
Yeah,
It's
something
like
like
a
that, yeah.
fever, and it's one of the different things that can go wrong.
Right.
To be a symptom that the body's not working. Okay.
Exactly.
Okay, Nat, can you step back a little bit or squat? You're so tall, we can't see your head.
What am I doing? Down here. Nicer for me to sit down. You mentioned in your book whole 2 cardiologists, Dr. Lester Morrison and Dr. John Goffman, did studies on this 70 years ago. Then Dr. Nathan Pritikin in the 60s and the 70s, then Dr. Esselstyn and Dr. Ornish. What is it going to take for physicians to share this information with patients?
That's a $64 million question, or let's say $64 billion question. I've really been deeply involved in recent years in speaking, mostly to medical schools, by the way. I've given more than 600 and some lectures since our book came out, and the majority of my lectures are to medical schools and medical conferences. And I'm delighted to see that physicians who are not trained in this area, you know, in medical schools, they don't get training in nutrition. And, you know, there's another way of looking at this. There's about 63 different medical specialties, if you will, 76 according to some count. But in any case, there's that many medical specialties. Nutrition is not even a medical specialty, yet it's the single most important medical specialty of all. So the question you're asking is really a momentous question in a sense. You know, why doesn't the professions teach nutrition? That's one thing. And so doctors don't understand nutrition. That's a big issue. And even in my community of medical research, you know, nutrition is not accorded the kind of support that other things get. At NIH, for example, nutrition only gets, and there's 28 institutes at NIH, heart, lung, and all that sort of stuff, all these different diseases. There's not one that's called Institute of Nutrition. So your question is really in reference to the fact that the public don't tend to understand nutrition, and for good reason. It's very confusing, and doctors need to get it. But I have to say that I'm really pleased to say and gratified that there are really now doctors coming forth. It's very exciting. I just spoke in Los Angeles a couple weeks ago to 780, mostly physicians. So it's really quite exciting.
So I assume it's our responsibility as well as patients to at least share what we know with physicians.
Yes, yes. Now, are you a physician?
No, I'm a hospital administrator.
Okay, you're even more important in some ways. You got all of the
241 of whole, you wrote, truly winning the war on cancer requires individual responsibility for our choices. What are your thoughts regarding how much of this dilemma is related to education versus self-discipline?
Oh, it's a huge effect. And I think that education, in other words, creating knowledge for the public is very, very important. And I must tell you, and I was in national policy development for about 20 years, testifying before Congress and, you know, and things like that. So I've been deeply involved in that sort of issue, you know, thinking about how do we advance this cause. I must tell you that the system within which we live, and we're all responsible for this, actually represses this information. They actually proactively repress the information. It's been going on for quite a long time because it doesn't make money. That's the issue. This information is very powerful in terms of creating health. but it's very weak in terms of generating money. So we've actually been captivated in our society by the idea that we have to make money, and as much money as possible. That's the issue.
Thank you. On page 126 of Whole, you wrote, this strongly indicated that at least 80 to 90%, and probably closer to 97% of all cancers are related to diet and lifestyle, not to genes. Could you speak about how organizations like the American Cancer Society respond to your assessment?
Well, at first, back in the early 1980s, when I was on a National Academy committee at that time, publishing a report on diet, nutrition, and cancer, the American Cancer Society was not on board, and they were actually seemingly contesting what we were saying. Later, however, I helped organize another cancer research organization. It was very successful. And then the American Cancer Society asked me to be a major advisor for their organization. Everything was going pretty well for a while, but I couldn't keep that position. I had so many things to do. After that, the American Cancer Society, I must tell you, for some years then partnered with the Cattle Barons Association to hold these gala events in order to support fundraising. And so I think the American Cancer Society has actually strayed from what they were and what they should be. I don't see how an organization like that can get in bed with the pharmaceutical industry and with the cattle industry so overtly, so right in your face kind of thing. They're not doing it the right way. So I've become, actually, to be honest, very disappointed with the American Cancer Society.
This is a question from one of our Chat and Chew regulars who works hard with us. After eating plant-based for 3 years, this is her statement, my cholesterol has dropped 141 points. Lower backbone density has gone from 4 to an improved 2.9. Is it the food I'm not eating or the food that I am?
It's a combination of both. And we don't know. It's hard to predict what proportion is due to what proportion. The thing is, when we choose to eat animal food, supposedly to get that protein, which we don't need, that's a centuries-old idea. When we consume animal-based foods, what we're doing is we're displacing the foods we should be consuming. That's the whole plant-based food. So it's a combination. The plant-based foods have lots of antioxidants and complex carbohydrates and all the good stuff that actually either prevents and or reverses these diseases. The animal-based foods, as I say, loaded with protein, obviously, oftentimes high in fat. That's not what we need. It's exactly the opposite.
Question you may have already answered, I think, but it seems the athletes of this country are especially focused on consuming lots and lots of protein, many as shakes after a workout. Would they suffer the negative health consequences down the road if instead of whey protein, they focused on consuming a plant protein shake? If they did, they would then be getting excessive amounts of plant protein, like more than 20%. Does any of your research look at the effects of excessive plant protein higher than 20%? And what would be the long-term health consequences?
Okay, first off, the protein is in plants. We don't need to worry how high that might go, even up to 15, 20% or so, because when we're consuming as whole food, not only is the protein itself less damage less than the animal protein, but much more importantly, when you're consuming the whole food, you're consuming all the stuff that comes along with it. And so the protein of plants is not harmful. It's really quite good. That's not an issue. As far as athletes are concerned, and I've worked with some world-class athletes, but football, Gary Player, for example, he was one of the first to grab the book and run with it. He carries the book every place. Tony Gonzalez, a football player, all pro, and so forth. A lot of athletes now are beginning to embrace this idea and are starting to use it and discovering that actually they're more coordinated. They're more coordinated. They can actually be stronger. And they tend to lose some weight, which worries them a bit initially when they do this. But in reality, their bodies are healthier. One final thing. This has been told to me by two people. Tony Gonzalez, the football player, for one. The other was Scott Dave Scott, Ironman triathlon. He came to my class and lectured, and both of those guys are with the NFL. They told me what was the number one secret of the NFL, still today, and that is the average age of death of the National Football League linemen who use the most protein. The average age of death is between 56 and 57 years. They die of diabetes, obviously obesity in many cases, heart disease. And so what I'm finding out from my athletic friends, and many of them, as I say, world-class athletes actually, when they go on to this, their performance actually improves and they get healthier and they live longer.
What is your opinion on the difference between eating fresh food, frozen food, or even canned food? Is there a huge difference, and what would be your take on that?
Well, the main thing, I'm assuming you're talking about plant-based foods. Okay, so amongst those three, fresh food is ideally the best. You're right out of the garden, obviously. Second best would be the frozen foods. It's retaining more of its nutritional characteristics. And canned food is third place, it's last place. Because
what is available for you, it's not a deal breaker, it's okay?
Yes, not necessarily a deal breaker, it's true. It's better to have canned food than fresh beef.
Okay. Very good.
Before we go, I thought you'd
Say, before we get going.
Hi, my name is Karen, and I want to thank you for all the things that you put out for us to read. And I wanted to also thank you for Plant Pure Nations. We got a chance to meet your daughter and you at the rallies, and I happened to be at the end of the video of Plant Pure Nation as being one of the people at the rally. But I wanted to thank you and your family for your efforts, because it's really helping so many.
Well, thank you very much. It's my oldest son, Nelson, who's the director of that film, as you know.
That's the truth. That was an exciting rally when Karen was there, and she was enjoying the different things she was learning from that movie, The Plant Pure Nation, and of course all the reading she's done as well. Thank you all for your questions. One thing I wanted to touch base with, because Leanne is here for her part in just a second, and Robbie, just to keep you up on where we are, when I finish with Dr. Campbell, you'll play Leanne's video, vegetable lasagna, because now we're going to look at foods, and it's just a minute long, and then Leanne will be here to help you know what you can do to add to your plate to help reduce your risk of cancer. But before that happens, Dr. Campbell, you just got back from a tour of Europe, and
Yes.
you spoke to the European Parliament.
Right.
Can you tell us just a minute about speaking with them and what you were doing there?
Yeah, I spoke to a number of to medical groups in a number of European countries, in Europe, I have to tell you that at the top, there seems to be more serious interest than what we have in this country, primarily because, and this is a United Nations conclusion as well, in Europe, they have a single-payer system. Politically in this country, that has not been very popular. Because in Europe, all the countries have a single-payer system.
Now, that means single payer for insurance.
That means the government is basically providing the services. I know the gentleman here who's the administrator might have a comment to make about this, but the reality is that in Europe, the single payer, the ministers of health, for example, they take more interest, in my view, in this because they're the ones paying the bill. It is a difference. It's very significant. And but in the population at large is not. I think we're a little bit ahead in our country.
Oh, really?
Yeah, just an impression. I mean, it's only a personal impression that there's more public awareness of this issue. And I did speak before the European Parliament in Brussels. That was arranged by a couple of delegates from the Italian delegates who were there, who also got very interested in this. They represent a group called the 5-Star Movement in Italy, which is sort of like, it's very progressive. And they're starting to elect officials now, including their delegates to the European Parliament. It's all very interesting. Other countries are starting to do the same thing. And yeah, what else can I say? I mean, I just, in Portugal, I spoke to a live audience at the time it was on, but I mean, the audience in the room was only 600, but otherwise it was 39,000 people. In Italy, it was 15,000 people. And so I'm actually getting tremendous enthusiasm in Europe, and I spoke of the number of Eastern European countries in particular. There's 2 hospital-like, they're clinics, but they're really becoming major, really big, who actually got the China study about 10 years ago and are really making it work. That's their sort of Bible. One is in Warsaw, Poland, and the other is on the Mediterranean coast in Spain. And in both cases, they've had 30,000 patients already and are very excited about what they're doing. And so there's a lot of other smaller sort of clinics around Europe that are starting to take this
Now,
up.
your son's just started working with Lee County in Florida.
Right. Yeah, Nelson, he has, as a follow-up to the Plant Pure Nation film, actually has a line of foods that has been really well tested, and you can get them online and that sort of thing. He's also setting up these pods that you know all about, and that combination of foods plus pods plus some other things. He just signed an agreement with the Lee Memorial System in Fort Myers, Florida. And I spoke down there with my son. Maybe it was the last winter, I guess, and I spoke to 1,100 people. And so now there's interest being expressed by other health systems too, in both in Florida and elsewhere, in maybe signing on to this program. I find it very exciting, the whole pod concept.
That's exciting. Did you have any more questions from your side now?
I only have one. Someone asked a question about peanut butter.
Not a problem. Not a problem. That story arose back in the 1950s and 1960s when it was discovered that it had a chemical in there from molds that grew on peanuts. And the chemical is called aflatoxin. Actually, that's where I started much of my career. And so it was a carcinogen, yes, when you tested it in rats, but the level that's in peanuts, for example, is inconsequential. No problem. Peanuts are a good source of protein, by the way, plant protein.
Told that low-fat and non-fat dairy is better than full-fat. But as we watched Forks Over Knives documentary, we heard you say that neither are good because of the excess protein. And this extra protein is associated with raising the risk of prostate cancer. Can you expand on this?
Not much. I said it right to the point, yeah. Thank you very much. And thank you, Dr. Lucas. I understand that you are a graduate of Cornell. Is that right, Dr. Lucas?
Annual reunion.
You just
I
attended his
very much
65th.
appreciate having a Cornellian in the audience.
Special thanks to Dr. T.Colin Campbell for taking time to share with us at our Chat and Chew meeting, as well as you here at the Chat and Chew Online. We're very fortunate to have this opportunity, but you may be asking yourself, now what do I do with this information? I know now what might be leading to problems with increased risk of cancer, but how do I change my dinner plate? Well, join us at the companion video where we also had Dr. Leanne Campbell speak with us about what we can do to change our plate. And then we can take charge and do our part to reduce risk of cancer. You'll find the link to that companion video below. So join us, and thanks for joining Chat and Chew Online.